The critique that you gave of the interpretations of the yamas and niyamas is essentially what I read as the critique that the hatha yogis who came along later on after the followers of Patanjali and the more classical yogis that carried on the Ashtanga or eight limbs of yoga. The critique that you gave is essentially the critique that they gave, which is that the yamas and niyamas, if they are practiced like these ethical codes, essentially divide the mind from itself, and it creates these deeper divisions in mind.
Mm.
Whereas the intention is to move forward as in union of bringing parts of ourselves together, as you talk about it in terms of uncovering. And it makes me wonder is it seems evident to me that individuals and possibly a very large number of individuals were practicing the yamas and niyamas in the way that you're talking about at the time, because otherwise why would this critique from hatha yoga had come into the historical record if it weren't already being practiced this way as more of an ethical code. However, when I look at the translation, right, the translation is restraints and observances, and I think particularly observances makes a lot of sense as a translation, because if rather than trying to change something about myself, I'm observing, I take that invitation that you gave earlier. Why is it? I'm observing why is it that I decided to steal this idea or something? Oh, I'm feeling insecure. And that to me makes a lot of sense. So it seems to indicate to me that there has probably been in the past those that took on the tradition in the way that you're saying, where it's an uncovering process. And there have
Mhm.
been others, and probably mostly have carried on the tradition in terms of ethical codes. I'm guessing that that has had become most of it, because it doesn't make sense to me why there would be this hatha yoga critique that comes later on, which is why the limbs of hatha yoga eliminate the yamas and niyamas. Why would they do that if they weren't observing something about how this was practiced in the world? So it's interesting to me because it makes me think that there must have been both going on in the eight limbs tradition.
Well, yes, I'm not familiar with what you're describing, but at the same time, it's, the Yoga Sutras and the teachings of yoga and the Yoga Sutras have always been difficult for me personally. I've never understood them, most of them, as you know, and the idea of buddhi and all these different parts of the mind. It's been foreign to me, and for me, I think part of it is that um, the initial notion of in yoga is it's a dualistic philosophy. There's Purusha and Prakriti, these two principles. And once if you're starting from a dualistic foundation, um, how do you integrate? How do you get to a sense of oneness? I'm not a student of this. I don't know it profoundly, but that's the impression, is that what you're quoting, I would think, is the exception. Like I'm talking in a way about the yamas and niyamas. That's the exception. It's not the way most people in the tradition or most teachers have write about it or have understood it. That's how I would tend to regard it, without knowing historically how prevalent that was, or the rest of how they were interpreting the Yoga Sutras, for example.
Yeah, that's my sense of it as well, and I it's just interesting to me because I it seems like the solution or the unwinding of all of that is built right into the word. Like the word means observance. Like
Uh-huh.
so it does seem like there must have been some kind of original, whether it was Patanjali or someone before him, there must have been some original intent very similar to what you are talking about and what the Hatha yogis were critiquing about putting those two limbs up front.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have to go super far into that, but it's I don't know. To me, it's kind of it's interesting to see how traditions evolve, and sometimes they stray away from where the intent was. And looking back, it's hard to tell sometimes. Did they
Right.
stray? Did another evolution come along and kind of revitalize it? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting journey.
I'm interested in contentment, as one of the yamas and niyamas. And how do you, from the point of view of trying to get somewhere, get to contentment? Because the very attempt to get there is comes from discontent. So from discontent, you can't get to contentment. It has to be, I think, with what we're talking about, just inquiring into and exploring, being present with my discontent,
Mm.
and just feeling into that rather than trying to reach that.